Hello and welcome to another edition of the Money Players Podcast. Mikey P, Mike Brabozzi in with my favorite handicapper. And man, I got to meet at Churchill Downs over the weekend for the Derby. Nick Tammaro. Nick, you had an unbelievable week at the Derby. Fantastic coverage. Your handicapping too was spot on. So talk about it a little bit. It looked like you were having a blast the whole week.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. It was great to meet you in person, of course. That was one of the highlights for sure. But yeah, I guess I had the right approach. I printed those PPs Saturday night before I left Sam Houston. So if anybody from Sam Houston's watching, I owe them like 111 pages worth of printouts, and started handicapping Sunday night. Tried to get finished by Tuesday. That way I had time to think about a little bit more of it. And, there were a couple of horses that really stood off the page the first go through, and amazingly, Mikey, they ran well. That's the hard part, right? And one of them was Look Forward, obviously. That was probably the best price, and cobbled together a few winners along the way leading up to that. So it was a really fun 5 days. It was my first time being there for the week, which was great. So big thanks to everybody at Twin Spires, who, of course, sponsor us at the network as well. So it was, it was very enjoyable. It was a great time. I'm sure you had a good time as well.
Oh, unbelievable to be there. And it's great. I love being at the racetrack anyway, but then that top-notch racing, the best horses, hanging out with the boys and getting to meet certain people that I've definitely wanted to meet for a long time. Just a fantastic weekend. The weather, not necessarily fantastic, but for me, it didn't take away from it. I was still, very, very much engaged and there the whole time. So I loved it. What you say, you had a few horses, but you crushed Friday. I think you had the last four winners on top in that pick four. And then plenty of nice big prices on Saturday. So just we're going to recap some of these races here for this week's weekend recap. And of course, lots of great racing at Churchill on Friday and Saturday. We're going to look at Friday first and a couple of the big races that happened on Friday. Of course, the first one we'll talk about is the Ali Sheba, the return of Fierceness. And he faced Locked, and Locked apparently didn't get the memo that he was supposed to race that day because he certainly didn't show up. But Fierceness did, Nick, and he broke the track record that had been around for quite a while.
Yeah, I saw a quote from Todd Pletcher today that said something like, well, whenever you break a track record at a place that's been open 150 years, it's got to be a pretty good performance. And he was right about that. It was a final time of a minute 40. What was it exactly? A minute 40.66. And I think that number got more impressive when we saw the La Troienne half an hour later, so 40 minutes later. But yeah, really razor sharp performance by Fierceness. I'll say, Mikey, it probably, when you look at the final time and you look at the pace of that race, it probably makes you a little bit more forgiving with regards to Locked, but this was a bad performance. I mean, it was not supposed to be that he basically never got out of third gear. Fierceness was very good. He stalked outside comfortably. He really did some of the things that I think we wanted him to do as a 3-year-old. So this was an eye-opener, and you wonder now where they'll go next. All the word is that the plan all along has been the Met Mile. And obviously that's an important stallion making race. He's a horse that already has a stud deal. So It's not as if they're trying to make him to a stallion. They're trying to make him a more valuable stallion at this point. And if he ends up there, that could be a real showdown. It's going to be a horse that comes from the same stable that we'll be talking about in a few minutes, but also just a touch and a few others that have looked really good. I think Raging Torrent may end up going there after his Godolphin Mile win. So very, very strong effort from Fierceness, who, serves notice that he might clearly at this point already be the best older horse in the country.
Yeah, and I do think I agree with you. Like he's showing things that we wanted to see from him at 3. Talent's always been there, speed's always been there, but this looked like a more polished version of him. He's getting the maturity. He's fast, and he get a nice field here. I thought Most Wanted raced pretty well. But Locked was just never really looked comfortable the entire way around. Never had a chance in the race. And I had bet quite a bit on him. So I watched him the whole time. It did not go well. And that was one of my duds for Friday. And you mentioned the La Troienne. Well, I think the entire racing Sharpie universe was against Torpedo Anna. She finished last at 2-5. It was Raging Sea that won it from off the pace, but Taxed was a 30-1 second place finisher. You knew when Taxed was looming up in the stretch that Torpedo Anna probably had no chance. So just a lot of a big surprise. I know she had a little trouble in the race, but I don't know, maybe back a little quick. Not her day, but you've been sort of saying this all spring that, you know, this was probably going to be the time that she got beat.
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of the factors that went into it. She was coming back in 20 days, and you know, I at risk of being called like just a Debbie Downer and a hater, which is a word I don't particularly care for when you're trying to offer up objective analysis. I said, you know, coming out of the Apple Blossom, it looked like she wasn't quite the same. And, you know, now you look at her whole body of work, Mikey, and you sort of feel like maybe she left it all on the racetrack and the Travers. I know there are going to be people who think that sounds ridiculous because she subsequently won a couple of grade ones, including the Breeders' Cup Distaff, but you know, she never really looked quite as good as she did that day. She looked awesome on Travers Day, and then came back this year, beat up on some soft competition with really cozy trips. This was anything but that. She got in tight early. Kenny McPeak used it as a bit of an excuse. I understand where he's coming from. I don't think it really mattered much. If she hadn't had some traffic going into the turn, I don't really think she was cracking the superfecta in here. This was a very lackluster performance, and so they sent her for testing and scans at Rood and Riddle. She came back clean, and you know, I think now the only question is how much time off does she need, maybe to regroup and look at a second half campaign. He mentioned the Fleur de Lis or something in New York, potentially the SUV, maybe as a stepping stone to the personal ensign, but now suddenly it feels as if I said after the Apple Blossom, her next start was going to be her most important start of the year. That was true. Now it feels like her next start is really her most important start of the year because we may only see her one more time if we see something similar to what we got last week in her next start.
And I think that maybe some horses have been ducking her in some ways. And like you mentioned, she faced some fields that were just some cupcakes. Well, these were a couple grade one types in here, a totally different ball game for her. She didn't get necessarily the trip she's used to, but I mean, she really had every chance. She was sitting outside, and when the real running started, she just never found anything whatsoever. Speaking of horses that had trouble, I like Dorth Vader a little in that race. She had plenty of trouble. She still seemed to be coming forward late, so I wouldn't mind betting her out of that race.
I think there's two ways to approach both Dorth Vader and Taxed, and I think Dorth Vader ran much better than I anticipated her to. If Dorth Vader and Taxed ran that well, it might be a chance that this race is just a total throwout for everyone. So I'm going to keep that as a possibility. I liked Randomized. She ran her race. Didn't set an overwhelmingly fast pace. It was a solid pace when you compare it to the pace in the Ali Sheba 40 minutes before or so. But she had every shot and ultimately is probably a horse that's going to be better deeper into her form cycle. I imagine they'll still end up going to the Phipps. No reason not to. She's been at her absolute best at Saratoga anyway, would be looking for her second consecutive Phipps. But she's going to have to run faster as well. She did not run a particularly fast race. I mean, this race got an 85 buyer speed figure, excuse me, which is one of the lower grade one winning buyer speed figures in this division that we've seen in a very, very long time. Now, mind you, they went a minute 0.9 faster to the half than they did in the Ali Sheba. So, you know, what is that? Is that the pace in the La Troienne was fast, or is that the pace in the Ali Sheba was slow? And I think it's probably more so the pace in the Ali Sheba was slow. Obviously, the pace in the La Troienne was faster than par. So I think it's a situation where you're going to see a horse like Randomized probably run better. And I think that's going to ultimately lead to some better performances down the road.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, she'll get back to her beloved Saratoga, which I think she's several lengths better there for sure. Well, we talked about weather, and Friday was no exception. They rushed to get the 8 bells in, which you had a very nice 7.5 to 1 winner and Looked Forward, who you mentioned earlier in the week that had been looking for a cutback. I thought this was a really nice race. I thought she got a very nice ride in here. There were horses coming, but I don't know that she was ever losing, Nick. She looked very good in the stretch.
She did. It was a performance where they were going around the turn. Obviously, I needed her, and she looked like she was moving really well, got to the front and powered clear. So it was a strong performance. Michael McCarthy had a very good record coming in on the cutback. And, you know, like I said a few times, I didn't want to beat up too much on Mario Gutierrez, but Umberto was an upgrade over Mario. And it wasn't as if I think the biggest problem was that it felt like this horse was having gait issues. And, you know, I watch a lot of trips. I watch a lot of races. And I think one of the more underrated elements of figuring out why horses are having trouble out of the gate is because of the pilot. A lot of times the rider can have a negative effect. She'd also broken from the rail in the Ashland. I think that hurt her a little bit as well. But she's a filly, obviously, who has some quality. I would assume that Michael McCarthy will keep her around 1 turn now. And there's a lot of money out there in that division. So the test still looms a little bit down the road. There's an interim race before that. She got an 87 Beyer speed figure. It was a projected fig. So I would, you end up having to see really where she goes from here.
Mm-hmm. Well, then the rain came and they raced the turf race next. And then we had an hour prior to the Grade 1 Kentucky Oaks. And again, you were a big fan of Good Cheer. I know you mentioned to me whenever we spoke that you thought that she was a very considerable favorite that was probably going to be a likely winner. And she was still undefeated, got an outside trip on a sloppy track. But she looked every bit the dominant winner, and a couple of long shots ran a second and third from very far off the pace. I thought Tenma ran pretty well, especially as contested as she was and close to the pace as she was early. But can't deny Godolphin, their weekend. It certainly got started with a bang with her.
Absolutely, no. I thought it was a really, really strong performance, all in all. So I would say that what you want to see from Good Cheer now is really just how good she is, because based on that La Troienne, you almost wonder, future casting a little bit, if Good Cheer might end up being the best older filly and mare dirt horse. There's a real chance of it. She's been very, very good. Yeah, of course. I mean, like everybody else who uses speed figures as a barometer, I wish the race had been a little faster. I think it's a little difficult to come up with a fig that you can feel overwhelmingly confident about, because obviously she ran on a different racetrack than Look Forward did. Look Forward ran on a fast sealed track. Fierceness and Raging Sea ran on a fast track, and the sun was out. It was actually warm at that period of time during the day. And then the 2 races that came late in the card, you want to assign the similar variant to those, but Moonlight's Mile came up about 16 points faster than Teddy Aroa's debut win, where she won by 8. So it's hard to believe Teddy Aroa ran a particularly slow race. So it's going to require some sort of future analysis. I thought Good Cheer was good. She's a horse that is very comfortable outside. She's clearly comfortable on a wet track. There's something to be said for the ease with which she goes about her business. I'm interested in seeing just how good she really is as time goes by, because I think there's a reasonable chance that she can really move forward. And I think, and as I've said all along, distance is really going to be her friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she never did look a loser. And a couple horses came from pretty far back in the pack. Drexel Hill was really far back and made up a ton of ground. I mean, was 11th at the 3/4 pole, and she flew to be second. Ben Curtis, and I thought he had a pretty nice weekend the way he rode it. And Bluster Broken getting back to the dirt, I thought she raced well also. Another one that had an outside type trip, but both of those two were moving forward late.
Agreed. Yeah, I thought the same thing. And I think, as you alluded to, you have to tip your cap a bit to Tenma. Tenma held on for 4th in here. Anna's Promise was 3 lengths behind her. They were the only horses that were anywhere near the early pace to stick around. And believe me, I mean, Tenma did a lot more running early than Anna's Promise did. She was much more engaged in the pace, and Lucara really fell apart. I'm not shocked by that. It felt like Lucara was shortening stride noticeably late in the Ashland. Now was going to tack on an additional 16th, and she had Tenma hounding her the whole way through. So Bob Baffert showed up with live horses. Southern California showed up with live horses. I think that's an important point to recognize as well. And so I would imagine I would assume most of these horses will come back in the Acorn. I mean, there's probably going to be a little bit of attrition in terms of field size, because there are going to be a lot of horsemen that just don't want to face Good Cheer. There aren't really a ton of options elsewhere until you get a little bit deeper into the summer and you start talking about the Delaware Oaks, Monmouth Oaks, Indiana Oaks, races like that. But as far as Grade 1s go, I would assume Good Cheer is going to dance just about every dance. So Acorn, Coaching Club American Oaks, Alabama all feel like they're on her bingo card.
Yeah, she still has yet to lose. So good luck beating her. For the rest of them, they're going to have some catching up to do. Let's go to Saturday. And tons of big races on Saturday. One race I'm going to talk about that I didn't really prep you for, but it's the 3rd race, and it was that 1X allowance that goal-oriented ended up wiring there for Baffert and Pratt. Now, this sort of had a ton of hype for this one-time winner for Baffert. but figured it'd come up too fast. I know he got it done. He seemed to sort of be getting tired late. I thought Hypnotist was getting to him there. A 91 buyer. Where do you think he goes from here? I know it was a sloppy track. I'm not sure that, he needs to go in a grade 1 necessarily right away now. I mean, he probably needs maybe something a little less to sort of make that jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think their ceiling for him was that he was going to run well enough to maybe garner a start in either the Preakness or Belmont, probably Belmont, knowing that the ownership group has Rodriguez now for the Preakness. The floor was that he would win like that, and you'd probably be looking at a race like the Matt Win or something a little bit lesser. And so I think they're probably going to trend towards that slightly lesser event. He's also a horse who's going to have to come off Lasix in his next start. And, it's not something Baffert has terribly struggled with, but it's still a concern. It's still worthy of mention. And he looked good. He didn't quite look up to his billing, didn't extend away from them the way we would have wanted, I think. So he's probably a good horse. He's still young. He's still lightly raced. He did kind of shred everybody who was anywhere near him early. And so I think it was a good effort all in all, but it did kind of leave you wanting more, I think is what you're alluding to. And I kind of felt the same way, especially once we saw the money that he got and the way he made the lead, pretty aggressively going down the backstretch. It felt like he was probably going to kick away from them a little bit in upper stretch. And maybe it makes you wonder a little bit about how far he wants to go. Maybe he wants to go a little bit shorter. So maybe he's a horse that we could see a cutback from. As keen as he was, it's hard to believe he's going to be overwhelmingly effective at a mile and an eighth plus.
Yeah, that was my thought. But I mean, second start, I just didn't think I agree with that.
So many unknowns, right? I mean, he's a horse who's going to get better start to start. He's now done a couple of 91s. Obviously, Tis Secure. I should say he didn't really shred everybody who was on the pace because Tis Secure was never that far back, but he was obviously much more engaged. And Hypnotist got a very good ride, riding that inside and able to get along there for a good share of it. He was dropping in class, obviously, out of a series of graded stakes races. So it'll be interesting. I think where Baffert runs this horse will tell you a lot about how you should feel about him.
Let's jump to the grade 1s. And a lot of people will say the race of the weekend, the grade 1 Churchill Downs. That was race number 8 on Saturday. Blanket finish, Nick. Mindframe found a way to get to the wire first, but Banishing and Niso's right behind, dead heating for seconds. I know you said to me you had Bookham Dano pretty good, who certainly had his usual trouble in the stretch. He wasn't far behind. Unbelievable race, and I'd love to see a lot of these horses just knocking heads all year long.
Yeah, it was an incredible race, and one that was worthy of the grade 1 billing. I needed Bookham Dano. Yeah, no doubt about it. He was my play of the day. He was a horse that I had used in all kinds of multi-race bets, bet him to win as well. And I thought we were getting the money at the 8th pole when he split horses, but he had been close to that pace, and I think it took a bit of a toll. So ultimately he was overcome late, but I mean, hell, he ran 4th beat in the neck, right? So it's hard to feel anything but just sort of a appreciation for the quality of that race all in all. It's a tough figure to make because the rain was falling pretty steadily. It was probably at its worst at that point. If it wasn't raining during that race, it had rained pretty hard prior. Okay. So it's just, we'll talk about Copian in a couple of minutes, but off of nearly identical half-mile times, it's hard to believe that they could be almost a second slower than her and not be racing on probably a significantly wetter racetrack. So there's a 10-point difference in the two figures. The figure maker played it straight, didn't adjust anything in terms of variance throughout the day. I do think that given the way the race unfolded, horses like Bookham Dano and Mulligan were probably at a little bit of a disadvantage because they were close early, and Bookham Dano kept kind of getting shoved into the race by Paco. And, he started to use him going into the turn, and then there was a spot just outside the quarter pole where Travis Stone noted in his call that Bookham Dano he looked like he was really loaded, and he was just waiting for a path. And Mulligan at that point is ranging up 3 wide, and there's a brief moment where Paco is trying to go outside, and the door is closed on him on Nisos. And I think Pratt made sure that he couldn't get outside of Mulligan. If he gets outside of Mulligan there, I think he wins. But there was no way Pratt was going to give him that path. He was going to make him split horses, and he did it. and ended up just getting caught right on the wire. So a lot to unpack there. Who else? Of course, you have to talk about obviously the winner. Mindframe was a horse that had come back. He looked a little ho-hum at Gulfstream. Didn't really look like he was really on the kind of trajectory I would have thought coming into the year. So I think given the fact that they cut him back, it feels like they're looking at keeping Mindframe at a mile or less this year, which probably is the best move. Does put him in a bit of a tricky spot for the Breeders' Cup, but Dirt Mile is a 2-turn race, probably something he can handle. He's a 2-turn route winner already. Niso's comeback race was outstanding. I mean, he ran really well off the bench. He is just a tremendously interesting horse, and you would imagine Baffert has the Met Mile circled for him, a race that Baffert has won a number of times, including last year. So it was great to see him back in one piece and basically every bit as good as he was early as a 3-year-old. I'll tell you a horse that absolutely stunned me how well he ran was Banishing.
Really?
David Jacobson obviously has this horse so razor sharp right now. He's just firing over and over. Dove to the rail late, got beat ahead in a 2-week return after running a banger of a race in the Oaklawn Handicap. This is a horse that's now strung together some really, really strong Beyer speed figures. So his last 6 Beyer speed figures go 103, 100, 102, 102, 106, 98. So he's a horse that's just run well over and over, and it's great to see. And Mulligan lost nothing in defeat, right? I mean, he ended up finishing. He was a horse that really wasn't taking much money. He ended up finishing 5th, beating a length, and is obviously using that as a stepping stone for the future. So just an incredible race, and one that, you know, even if you made a losing wager like I did, you appreciated the quality of the horse race itself, because, I mean, that is great theater that played out right in front of us.
Yeah, I liked Banishing going into the race just because I thought that race he ran a couple weeks ago was just fantastic. And he's just ultra sharp. And the fact that he was 11th early and got beat basically on the wire also. And he just, I thought the top 4 all ran amazing races. And Mindframe last year, you remember inside the now I know he was going further, but you know, he had a tendency to wander and sort of, you know, go to the outside. And that's a lot of times that got him beat a couple times last year. No such thing this time. And maybe it was the shorter distance that might have maybe contributed to that. I would think that he is best at a mile, but for him to get up in this race versus these horses, especially on this racetrack, I thought that he improved a lot more than I thought he had watching that Gulfstream race first time out. So just a fantastic race that you could probably watch 10 times and still not know who's winning, even though you know the result. I mean, that's just how good a race it was. And really, certainly one of the races of the weekend that absolutely lived up to the hype.
No question about it. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we had talked at some point, maybe I was doing the show with Pete, and I may have brought up the cutback on Mindframe, because a lot of times when horses do that and they get a little green or they get a little wonky late, it's because they just don't want to run that far. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they nearly squeezed grade 1s out of him in 1.25 miles and 1 1/8. And I think now he's kind of tipped his hand where he really wants to go. So he feels like a pretty much definite for the Met Mile, where he'll run against his stablemate Fierceness, coming in off a tremendous performance. And, you know, that has the makings of a great race. Let's hope everybody stays healthy.
Grade 1 American Turf was race number 9, and straight 3s here. Zulu Kingdom was bet to favoritism and raced like it. Got a perfect trip, a perfect ride. Got the jump on Test Score and New Century, who both I thought raced very well to be 2nd and 3rd. But there was no doubt about the winner in this race. Especially given the trip that he got, the ride that he got. I think that the soft turf certainly didn't hurt. And another one that's probably going to have a nice year. But those horses behind, this is a nice group.
Yeah, and look, I mean, their final time compares very favorably to the way the Old Forester Bourbon Turf Classic that we'll talk about in a few minutes went. So they looked good. I talked to Chad in his barn on Monday morning, and he mentioned, I asked him about Zulu Kingdom, which is newly minted grade 1, and he mentioned that he thought the horse might be a little bit better at a mile, that a mile and a 16 might really be pushing his distance limitations. And I think he was right. But what he showed is that he can get the mile and a 16th with the right trip. So this is a horse I really didn't have a ton of affinity for as a 2-year-old, and he's better than I thought. I think he's also improved in Chad's care, which is often the case with good early horses. I mean, he got a 90 buyer, so he's clearly a horse that's gotten better. And I think Flavian rides him with a lot of confidence. He was comfortable putting him forward. Came off the turn. It looked like Mibago was going to wire that field. But what I can tell you is this, Mikey, 0 wire-to-wire winners last week on the turf at Churchill. So it didn't matter whether it was wet on Saturday, and I really don't even know how wet it was. Eddie Canale was interviewed after the Distaff Turf Mile, and he was like, I don't think that turf's soft. And they were kicking up nothing. So I think it had gotten very, very dry by Thursday or Friday. The temperatures really went up on Wednesday and Thursday. And but no wire-to-wire winners. Everybody came around the outside. I want to say Zulu Kingdom was about as close as any horse that won. There was a nice winner on Wednesday, I think, named Classic Q from Mark Cassie, who had also been relatively close early. So yeah, it was definitely. There was also, to me, on Saturday, there was an issue with the inside. I don't think you wanted to be close to the rail. It felt like every rider was almost deliberately staying 3 or 4 pats off the inside. Maybe I'm making excuses for test score, but I'm going to bet test score back in the Pennine Ridge, especially if all of those horses are in there. I don't know if Chad will push Zulu Kingdom all the way out to a mile and an eighth. He might try. And I'm assuming that race is still a mile and an eighth. It's been relocated to Saratoga. But it'll be a prep for the Belmont Derby, which will come up on 4th of July weekend. If that's the case, I'll bet test score back because I thought he was inside for a little bit too long. And Manny was doing what you normally would want to do on a turf course, which is save ground. I just don't think you wanted to do that very much on Saturday. So that's kind of my biggest trip-related takeaway.
Yeah, New Century I thought raced better than I expected. I know he was in the race. He nearly was second, really. I mean, he was fine.
Well, this was an odd scenario for him too, right? Because he was coming over on basically no rest. So he had run what 3 weeks before, 3 or 4 weeks before, and was moving into Brendan Walsh's care. So yeah, he feels like a horse is going to get better the longer he's in the States.
Race 10 was the Derby City Distaff, and the fastest race of the weekend, at least on the buyer scale, with Copian showing up in the slop and backing up some of those big figures that she's had. That 110 buyer back on February 1st. Well, Nick, she jumped back to a 109 here, and another nice ride. Really, she is a super, super nice horse.
She really is, man. She has improved a lot. She was good already, but to follow up that big La Brea performance with the win in the Santa Monica and then this is really just incredible. And you know what I liked about this performance, Mikey, was that Kazushi Kimura, who's been on her now multiple times in winning efforts, she was probably not where he anticipated early. And you can tell he has so much confidence in this horse. He never panicked. He just worked his way through along the inside. He waited. He got outside when he could. And boy, did she produce a run when she got outside. She really exploded in that final 3 furlongs. Looked like she might even struggle at the top of the stretch, maybe to get there, but she blew right past Hope Road when push came to shove, who's a good horse in her own right. So big performance for the Southern Californians, and Copian's obviously a horse that's really, really good and a force to be reckoned with in this division. You know, I was talking to a friend last night, and he said, well, who's the best horse in this division that we've seen in a while? You know, has there been anybody that's run these kind of figures? And we were trying to think about it. We started throwing out names like Rupi Doll, Gamine, horses like that you know, performed well over and over, but nobody has put together this many fast races like she did. So it was an excellent performance. And, you know, I think one of the things that we'll laugh about in the future is we're going to look at the chart of this race and say, she wasn't favored. And no, she wasn't favored. I think everybody bought the Mudlark hype on Ways and Means, you know, and I don't want to be dismissive of Ways and Means. She finished a half length back of second and got I think a 104 buyer speed figure. So a 102, which is her second highest ever. Right. So she ran extremely well off the layoff. Copian is just that good. And unfortunately, Ways and Means and some other horses are going to have to deal with her again. We'll see if Richard Mandela sends her back east. He mentioned the ballerina as a possibility, but he also said that he could think of the freeways that it takes to get her from her stall at Santa Anita down to Del Mar. So I'm not going to be surprised if she doesn't make another trip. And quite honestly, at this point, she doesn't really have to.
Yeah. And it's nice to see Kimura get this ride. I think that he's a top rider. I know that he's not the same as a lot of these other guys, but I think that I got no problem with him on a horse, and for him to show up, get this ride and win like he did, it really solidifies him. And I'd like to see him get more rides, like this, because he's deserving. He's very good.
Yeah, good talented rider. Again, didn't panic at all. Rode her like he knew she was going to win, and she delivered. So it's important for the pilot to know what's underneath them, and I think he's got a very keen understanding of just how talented and special this filly is. So yeah, it's great to see, and she's obviously in supreme hands. I mean, Mandela is one of the top 5 trainers of our generation, and I think at this point he's just got to figure out how to keep her healthy for 6 months.
Yeah, and somehow she was 8-1 on the morning line. I'm not sure what happened, but we don't bash morning lines on this show.
No, I stay away from that. What I will say about the morning line is you give a guy about 12 to 18 hours to handicap some of the hardest races of the year. There's going to be a faux pas here and there. So yeah, she was definitely never going to be 8-1 in there, even with the even if the horses who scratched had run.
The race that usually goes before the Derby is the Turf Classic. And I know you liked Spirit of St. Louis, who rallied from quite far back to win and ripped my guts out, as I had Mercanti in every single bet. And you mentioned really not much that was close to the pace. Got there on this turf course. I thought this horse raced extremely well to be second in there at 13-1. But Spirit of St. Louis backed up that big race in the Pegasus. And this is a grade 1 horse. This is no longer just a New York bred. This is a serious, I think, long distance turf horse who might be the best in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, I think what he did was he just outlasted everybody else. And this division clearly is a lot thinner than it's been. I think the connections of redistricting would tell you that they kind of hoped that he was going to have a better 5-year-old season than he's had so far. He's been a little disappointing in 2 starts, and obviously looks like he probably doesn't want to go 1 1/8 based on the way he's finished up his last couple. He was inside for an appreciable part of this race, which again is not really where you want it to be. But he has no excuse. I mean, you were rooting for Mercante. I had a little on Spirit of St. Louis and some multi-race bets. And I mean, at the 8th pole, it was like, is somebody actually going to win this? Like, is somebody really going to lunge forward and try and actually win? And it was sort of a microcosm of this division on paper, which is that it's just incredibly wide open. There's nobody that's really stood up and done anything. And Integration had a tough trip, stuck in behind. He got in a little traffic. I thought Highway Robber and Gold Phoenix probably took the worst of the track profile. And I'd actually be very interested in Highway Robber if he were to come back in a race like the Manhattan. I kind of hope he does because I do think he can be effective at 1 mile and 3/16. And, the thing about this division, Mikey, and we're being reminded of it now, is that in many ways, this division's been carried by whatever Godolphin was sending over.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't participated in the turf races this year. So you think about Nation's Pride and the horse that won the Manhattan last year, whose name escapes me. I think he passed away. But these horses they're not here. So what we're seeing is a number of American horses that they're just horses, right? Mm-hmm. They're not anything special. They're not really grade 1 type. Spirit of St. Louis is a clearly way above average New York bred, but he's no star. And I think this race is a good reminder of that.
Let's jump to the Derby. I know that Pete and JK certainly recapped this, but we can certainly weigh in and give our 2 cents. I thought it was a fantastic race. I thought the winner and the runner-up got great rides. Sovereignty, of course, going past journalism with that outside trip, and ended up paying $17.96. I thought pretty fair considering the Derby win pool, and we can get into that a little bit. Journalism ran his race. He just wasn't quite good enough on the day. I thought Baeza was very good in there. He was getting to journalism late. A couple more steps, and he probably gets second in there. A lot of people thought Final Gambit got plenty of he was flying late. Some people thought maybe he might have had a chance to win given the trouble he had, being that Citizen Bull went out of the gate and decided to go 4 gates right. So a lot to unpack, Nick. Give us your thoughts on the Derby. I'm curious to get your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo every sentiment that you just offered, which is that, I think when you're in a situation like Junior Alvarado was in with Sovereignty, when he knew exactly what he had under him, what it enabled him to do was sort of ride both Sovereignty and journalism. And what I mean by that was you could tell he was dead set from the start on moving right after journalism did. And when Journalism gets outside and starts to run around the turn, Sovereignty immediately starts moving right behind him. They were about 3-4 lengths behind each, or apart, maybe 5 lengths apart when they crossed the winning post the first time. Sovereignty's along the rail. I mean, it was just a beautiful trip, right? You watch it back and you think, how could a horse come from 16th in the Derby, never got steadied, never got it really in behind horses, was always there for his rider. It just really worked out perfectly, and it feels like the stars were aligned in many ways for Sovereignty to get there. Funny anecdote, I watched one of the midweek races, I think it was on Wednesday, with Mike Maker. He walked over to where I was standing, and I said to him, "Who do you like in the Derby who's been training well?" And he said, "Mott's horse in the favorite." And that was just, it was that simple. And they were the 2 best horses going in. They trained like the 2 best horses, and they performed like it. So I think Sovereignty is a horse that I have a lot of respect for. With that said, and we could probably talk a little bit more about moving forward when we get towards the end of it, I think he's a horse that you would have to take a hardy position against in the Preakness if you were to run there.
Yeah, I agree. Just with his style, it would be almost like, I do think he could get the pace, which that's something that will benefit him. And I do think that depending on who shows up, he might be a little classier than most of those, which could help him also. Similar to, it kind of reminds me a little bit like if these 2 would show up, it would almost be like Street Sense and Curlin all over again. If they would show up in the Preakness, because those 2 are just so much better than everyone else. Maybe Baez, we know he's not coming, so he's probably right there in the conversation. But if it would be those 2 again, really, I mean, who do you like that's on the outside looking in compared to these 2? They would probably find their way to the front again. That would be my thought as far as if they would both show up in the Preakness. It sort of reminds me of those 2 and just how much better that they were on that Triple Crown trail than most of them. But I mean, it always all depends on who shows up. But you're going to get the River Thameses, you're going to get Rodriguez. I mean, there's going to be plenty of speed for him to chase, but he's not going to get the same trip that he got here at Churchill. He's certainly got a perfect trip, and you're, like you said, you're supposed to bet against perfect trip winners who like that racetrack. I mean, I do think Churchill also suits him. So at 3 to 5, you want to take a shot against.
Yeah, I mean, and look, if Journalism were to show up there, I'd probably have no problem trying Journalism if he was now, the odds were flipped and he was 3 to 1 and Sovereignty was 6 or 7 to 5, which I think is entirely possible. American Promise is reportedly going there, and Wayne knows a thing or two about winning that Preakness on the front end, so I think you can count on American Promise getting a far more aggressive ride. He did get into a series of tough spots. Ultimately, probably is not of this caliber, but obviously Wayne Lucas is going to take a chance when he can. Again, you mentioned it before we talked about the race in particular. Take nothing away from Journalism. Journalism ran his race, right? He moved at the time where he needed to. I don't think he moved too early. I think he just got beat on the square. I think the only thing I'd be worried about is that he was shortening stride quite a bit late, and he didn't feel like a horse on paper that should struggle with 1.25 miles. Perhaps he was a little tired. Maybe it was the mud. Maybe he was a little too close to the pace. Because there really was nobody who was anywhere near the pace, anywhere near him at the finish. Owen Almighty was still many lengths behind, and Owen Almighty ended up being the pace horse that stuck around. And I was telling people all week, who's your pace horse to hang around? There's got to be one speed horse that cracks a superfecta. Well, it turned out there were none. All 4 horses came from deep in the pack. I mean, I think they were respectively. It's some wild position. I think I'm going to look real quick. So they were at the 3/4 call. They were 17th, 11th, 12th, and 19th. So, it was just one of those where it totally collapsed. It wasn't like an orb style collapse where somebody grabbed the baton, went quick, and then everybody else caught that horse, like Normandy Invasion. But it was clearly a pace collapse. And, guys like us are looking to bet against horses that win from off the pace in a pace collapse. So, Absolutely. Again, we keep coming back to that same conclusion. Baeza, as you warned and commented, feels like the Curlin type. I'm not saying he's going to turn into Curlin, but he's lightly raced. He's with a really good trainer. And I thought he took a nice step forward. I thought he ran really well. I think from a speed figure perspective, he actually he ran about the same race. He went from a 101 to a 102. He feels like the horse with the most upside right now of the best of this group. And I hope Sheriffs keeps him on path for a race like the Belmont. I think he would pack a mighty wallop in there.
Couple hard luck stories. You mentioned Owen Almighty. He certainly raced his guts out, considering nobody thought he should be in the race. but I thought raced very well. Burnham Square, I mean, it's been pretty well publicized at this point. Got stopped cold on the turn when Admire Daytona decided he just was no longer wanting to run. And when you ride that rail like that, sometimes it's great when you can get through. But sometimes, you get horses in front of you and there's nowhere to go. And he's probably the hardest lucked, worst trip horse coming out of the Derby. And I do think will be a much shorter price than maybe he should be coming off that trip. And then Sandman was somehow the second choice in the race and tried to come from last. And he just didn't quite have it. He ended up 7th. But, he certainly it was good that he was in the race, getting all the different kind of influencer type notoriety, let's say. So, I mean, he was okay, but I think he finished about where he should have.
Yeah, I don't think he's with the elite of this group, right? I think he's about, he's a fringe player in that regard. He still feels like he's got some maturing to do. He's a tappet, so a lot of times it takes a little bit more time, but Final Gambit blew by him like he was standing still in upper stretch, and he didn't really offer much resistance. You want to give these horses, I'm not going to give them the kind of excuses that their trainers are for it being a wet track. The trainers are always going to default to, he didn't like the wet track. He didn't pick up the going. He wants it dry, so on and so forth. Final Gambit's probably a horse that was helped by the wet track, being that he's a synthetic, probably a turf type ultimately. Usually a wet track is better for them. I don't really believe these theories that Churchill is kind to turf horses. I've heard that said in the past, and I don't really think there's any data to bear that out. I agree with you completely. Burnham Square's the trip horse out of there. I'll tell you what, if he was in my barn, I'd be awfully tempted to go to Baltimore. I know they're talking about the Belmont already, but that horse is sharp. And I mean, hell, he didn't run for a furlong and a half in there. So I'd bring him back quick. I think a lot of times when these horses are at peak physical condition, you're supposed to run them. You're supposed to run them as much as you can. And you can really run the risk of getting into trouble if you don't. So, he was weaving his way through there like a slalom skier. It was not pretty, and he did level off and finish quite well. So I think the also rans that you want to keep your eye on the most out of this race are Baeza at Burnham Square, and probably Final Gambit in that order. Final Gambit being, can he actually run this well on dirt? I find the Owen Almighty thing hilarious because when they asked Brian Lynch about where he's going next, he said to Woody Stevens, like, this guy is dying to run this horse one turn. He's basically saying, like, please let me run this horse one turn. And, he ran just well enough to remind everybody that he's probably supposed to get one more opportunity in a route. But Lynch knows. Lynch is very sharp. He knows this horse is not winning a mile and a quarter grade one. It's going to be very hard for him to do that. It's going to take some horses in this crop going by the wayside in order for him to do that. And he knows he probably is a grade one caliber sprinter. So it's kind of funny the way that all panned out so far. But, it's always a satisfying Derby when you see the 1, 2 finishers, 1, 2, 3 finishers in this case really didn't have any trip related issues. They had things go their way, and they're good.
A couple things before we go, Nick. I know it's a tremendous weekend. Do you think the Derby winner shows up in Baltimore, or do they bypass? I mean, I know it's tempting, but I would think that it's not that this horse is chasing a stallion deal necessarily. I mean, now Godolphin has their stallion. I mean, he's not going anywhere.
Right. I think he'll be there. I would say my gut feeling is he'll be there. Bill Mott is a guy who's never really shied away from a tough objective. And, I think what we learned about Sovereignty is that once Mott knew they were in the gate, I think he probably had the Derby in mind, but he knew he could bring a relatively fresh horse to Kentucky. And I think what he'll be able to do is bring that horse back quickly off of that. Because again, I mean, when these horses are at peak physical condition, you're supposed to run them. You're just not, there's no training into things after that. And I think when there's been a lot of horses that were successful in the Belmont that skipped the Preakness. Obviously, it makes sense, especially if you have any kind of trip-related issues. But, in this case, this is a horse that's really at the top of his game. You're supposed to run. And Mott's never been one to shy away. I'm glad the journalism camp has come out immediately and said, we're definitely looking at it. Obviously, it would be a much more fun race if he goes too. And Michael McCarthy's a guy who's won the Preakness already. He understands the importance of the Preakness. The Preakness matters. Like, the Preakness is a big deal. Yeah. And quite honestly, it really pisses me the hell off when the first thing that people do is whine about it being too close to the Derby. I get it. And I know the modern game is not situated for grade one horses to come back in 2 weeks. But, you move it a week, in 5 years, it's going to be, oh, nobody can come back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks is nuts. Then you move it another week, and 3 or 4 years after that, oh, these horses can't run back in 28 days. Like, there's no way. All of a sudden it's going to become a moving target. And to me, there are solutions to this problem that involve the grading of races, that involve a variety of different things. And I don't love the idea that we're just supposed to throw our hands in the air and say, okay, you have to move it because it's the only way we're going to get the Derby winner in there, and then like some trainer wins it who's a big believer in the Ragozins, and he says, oh, my horse ran a top. I can't run it back in 21 days. Too fast. I'll go to the Belmont. I got 8 weeks for that. It's a slippery slope. And the thing is that you want to acknowledge that. You want to remember that. I know I'm ranting, but the Preakness is a race that matters. It will forever matter. And I think if we can like re-embrace that and understand, get people to understand that it's not simply about, I don't love the, 100 years ago, they were, nobody scored runs and football players were wearing leather helmets and things like that. It's like, yeah, of course. Right. And our horses are being treated with different nutritional items and vitamins and God only knows what else that are different than they were 100 years ago. Times change, things evolve. The Triple Crown is the one thing in racing that works.
Exactly. That's exactly
the Triple Crown works. Right. It's like of all the things that we need to F with, the Triple Crown is like the last one because, there are a ton of, I will give you a quick anecdote. I was obviously in Louisville. I flew home Sunday morning. I was having lunch with my wife and daughter. We're sitting in a tiny 5-table Asian restaurant in Houston. And the table behind us had a 17-year-old kid, roughly 17 years old, and his dad. And all they talked about for 20 minutes was the Derby. And I mean, this is a kid that lives in a city with, as much as I would like to say there was more of it, there's not a lot of racing.
Right.
They probably weren't at the track. No, he was alerted to it by TikTok. He watched the race. He was talking to his dad about the odds. Obviously, there's more of a betting. We have an opportunity to get people into the game during the Triple Crown. Obviously, there's a little bit of a lasting effect of Race for the Crown. There's more interest. Don't mess with the Triple Crown. Like, mess with the Breeders' Cup. The Breeders' Cup needs to be messed with. The Triple Crown doesn't need to be messed with.
I agree 100%. You can't mess with something that is, it's timeless. It's something that, like you said, just works. And look, the handle on the Derby continues to be nuclear. And it's back. There was 140,000 people in a driving rainstorm in Louisville on Saturday. And honestly, I mean, the racing's great, but everybody cares about the Derby. Like, that matters. As soon as the Derby was up, everybody was out there front and center. And it's something that, like you said, just can't be messed with. And I think like the Preakness should be, you should just keep it the same. If you're good enough, you'll figure it out. And we've seen that there's horses that are capable of figuring it out over the past several years that have been the top horses. And if you're the best, you'll find a way to win. And we've had some great rivalries come out of Triple Crowns. I mean, there's just so much to not mess with it. And I agree. I would keep it the same. Yeah, the only thing I do think that the one thing that does suffer now with Churchill and this huge card that they have over this Friday and Saturday is that the Preakness undercard does suffer a lot from that. And just, these big, huge days now where we lump all these big stakes races, and the Belmont Day is the exact same thing now. So I do think that the Preakness undercard does take a hit because of those two and the way they're positioned and things. So that is one thing that I do think suffers from the entire, process. So
that's fair. And I mean, I would say the counter to that is they run a bunch of $100,000 ungraded and there's a couple of grade 3 stakes. So, it was historically the Preakness undercard, 25 years ago, if you ran in the Churchill Downs, you also ran in whatever the sprint was. Generally, it was called the Maryland Handicap, and then you ran in the True North. Right. So you ran in all those races. A horse like Artax, who nearly got punched in the face in the middle of the Maryland Sprint Handicap, came right back in the True North. So those times are different now, right? Those horses are just not going to run back. Not to say that if some of those races were 500,000, would they? But yeah, I mean, it's obviously the Dixie was also kind of the little brother of the 3-race turf series, with the Manhattan and the Woodford Reserve Turf Classic, as it was known back then, being the most important one. So yeah, I agree. I mean, it would be nice to see some of those races really regain some of the luster they had before. They've done some good work too with the trainer bonuses and the incentives and stuff to get more horses to come there. They're really trying for sure. And it's going to be a couple of fun days of racing. It's a little bit more of the Derby is so buttoned up and pristine and perfect, and everybody's well dressed and having a great time. And the Preakness is more like a backyard barbecue. Right. It's just a totally different environment, a totally different setting. And, this will be the last one. I think this is going to be the last one at Pimlico for a couple of years.
Yeah.
My understanding. So, yeah, we'll have to enjoy it and just see what happens coming out of it.
Well, Nick, unbelievable weekend, unbelievable coverage. I can't say enough how fantastic you were over the week covering things. Your handicapping was spot on. Great to meet you finally in person. I love doing this show. We've gone almost 50 minutes. It felt like, 10. So
we were just hitting our stride.
We're just getting into it. But this has been a production of In the Money Media. We've talked a lot of Preakness. Remember, Monmouth comes back this week. So that'll be this weekend live stream coming up with PTF over on Friday. I believe that's going to show up. So check out the network. Check out the YouTube channel. Check out inthemoneypodcast.com. Join the Plus service. Plenty of great picks there. Nick, appreciate you. And we'll talk to you soon. We'll see you all next time.
Looking forward to it.